Breaking news this morning, a bombshell leak from the highest court in the land is sending shockwaves across the free world this morning. Thousands of demonstrators hit the streets from coast to coast, D.C. to Los Angeles, New York City to Seattle. Their impassioned response to a leaked draft opinion from the Supreme Court that puts the future of Roe v. Wade in jeopardy.
As a woman who has benefited from Roe v. Wade, but also as a healthcare provider, this is an attack on women.
We're going to capture that rage, and we're going to move that into the midterm elections and ensure that people understand that we can't go back.
Democrats this morning on the offensive over the potential ruling, turning this reinvigorated passion into a cohesive political message as the country heads into primary and midterm season.
It would mean that every other decision relating to the notion of privacy is thrown into question.
I am here because I am angry, and I am here because the United States Congress can change all of this. Yes.
The elections this November will have consequences because the rights of 100 million women are now on the ballot.
We've got team coverage and expert analysis this morning as abortion access in America faces an uncertain future. Good to have you with us this morning. I'm Savannah Sellers.
And I'm Joe Fryer. We got a lot of news to cover on this Wednesday, so let's get right to it. The Supreme Court has confirmed the authenticity of that leaked draft and has now launched an investigation into the source of the leak.
We begin with our chief White House correspondent, Kristen Welker, for the very latest.
Hi, good morning to you. The fallout is intensifying this morning after that unprecedented leak of a Supreme Court draft suggesting the court is poised to overturn Roe v. Wade. In a blistering statement, Chief Justice John Roberts confirmed the authenticity of the draft while calling the leak a betrayal and affront to the court and saying the court-martial will investigate. All of it could upend the midterms, with Democrats fighting to hold on to their majorities and Republicans looking to take back control of Congress. Overnight, that bombshell from the Supreme Court continuing to rock Washington and the country, firing up protesters on both sides. After the High Court authenticated that leaked draft opinion by Justice Samuel Alito, which finds the 1973 Roe v. Wade ruling, which protects a woman's right to an abortion, was, quote, egregiously wrong from the start. Justices can and do change their positions before a final decision. But the draft shows 4 other conservatives joining Alito: Clarence Thomas, Neil Gorsuch, Amy Coney Barrett, and Brett Kavanaugh. The 3 Democratic-appointed justices would likely dissent. Chief Justice John Roberts' opinion still unclear. Based on the draft, there are enough votes to overthrow the decision that has established a federal right to abortion since 1973. If that happens, access to abortion would become a patchwork system across the country in the hands of the states, something many opponents of abortion rights have been pushing for.
Every state should have the right to allow consensus in its state to make its way into the law.
Democrats now aiming to energize voters around their message. Roe v. Wade should be codified into law by Congress. But currently, there's not enough support in Congress for such a move. President Biden warning Republicans could try to take away other rights that were granted by the High Court, from contraception to same-sex marriage.
It would mean that every other decision relating to the notion of privacy is thrown into question.
Senator Elizabeth Warren joining a protest yesterday.
I am angry because of who will pay the price for this.
For their part, many Republicans cheered the possibility that Roe could be overturned, but blasted the leak itself.
If it's a conservative, you're a traitor to the cause. If it's a liberal, you're the dumbest person in Washington.
Moderate Republican Senator Susan Collins, who voted to confirm conservative Justices Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, says she feels misled by their responses about Roe v. Wade during their respective confirmation hearings.
Settled as a precedent of the Supreme Court.
That's the law of the land. I accept the law of the land.
Senator Collins saying if the draft opinion is the final decision on Roe v. Wade, it would be, quote, completely inconsistent with what Justices Kavanaugh and Gorsuch said in their hearings and in their private meetings with her. As for the case itself, the Supreme Court is expected to issue a final ruling within the next 2 months.
Kristen Welker, thank you.
Now, if Roe v. Wade is eventually overturned by the Supreme Court, it would unwind half a century of federal abortion rights protections. The decision whether to allow abortions would then be left up to individual states, and battle lines are already being drawn. NBC News correspondent Blaine Alexander explains.
Well, this abortion clinic here in Baton Rouge is one of 3 in the state of Louisiana, all of which would be immediately impacted if Roe were to be overturned. It's because of what's known as a trigger law, something that nearly a third of the country already has in place.
Abortion is a human right.
From Chicago to San Diego.
Abortion is oppression.
New York to the nation's capital, the fight over abortion rights is spilling into the streets.
I've always supported life. I believe that every child should be born.
I'm afraid for my daughters. I'm afraid for my future granddaughters. I'm afraid for all women.
Even as the nation's highest court says the bombshell leaked draft is not a final ruling, states are already swiftly preparing for action should the court strike down the landmark decision protecting abortion access. If Roe v. Wade is eventually overturned, it will fall to each state to control abortion access. At least 20 would likely ban the procedure outright, 13 of those through so-called trigger laws, automatically outlawing abortions immediately with few exceptions. It comes as some Republican-led states are already enacting a flurry of restrictive abortion laws.
Arkansas is a pro-life state. We have already put a trigger law in place.
In Oklahoma, the governor signed a law Tuesday banning the procedure after 6 weeks. And while 16 states have already passed laws codifying the right to abortion, Connecticut has gone one step further, passing a bill to expand the list of medical professionals who can perform the procedure.
Half of this country, like Connecticut, led by Connecticut, will respect women, patients, doctors.
Nationwide, clinics say their patients will be caught in the middle.
It does make my job harder knowing that women won't be able to access.
Shannon Brewer is director of Mississippi's only abortion clinic, the one at the center of the Supreme Court case.
You're going to see an influx of women doing things that are unsafe because out of being desperate.
And back to that new Oklahoma law. It's only just a few hours old, but already the impact is stretching well beyond state borders to women who have come from other states, including Texas, to get the procedure. Back to you.
Blaine Alexander, thank you.
Let's bring in NBC News legal contributor Barbara McQuade. She's a former U.S. attorney in Michigan. Barbara, good to have you with us again. So that Supreme Court, now that the Supreme Court does say the leaked draft opinion is real, but we know it's not final, and that's key. So what could still happen? Could the final outcome change? Help us understand what happens behind the scenes here.
Well, it could. What happens typically is that justices draft the first opinion, that's what this appears to be, and then they exchange the draft with the other justices, and each of them suggests changes. Sometimes there are so many changes that someone who originally voted with the majority switches sides and is persuaded by a dissent that he or she has read and said, I'm going to join that opinion instead. So about 3 or 4 times a term, it actually flips where the majority decides the opposite way from that initial draft. But far more often, it is, some of the sharper edges get sanded off so that somebody agrees to join. Somebody decides to write a concurring opinion, but is going to join in the decision. And so it seems to me, in light of what we saw at the oral argument, and in light of the fact that they even took this case after the lower courts had rejected it, it seems likely that this is the final decision that's going to stand, even if some of the language changes a bit.
A really important point there, the fact that they even took the case in the first place. And of course, a huge part of this story is the actual leak itself. People inside and outside the Supreme Court want to know who's responsible. Chief Justice Roberts says that there's this investigation happening, so we may get more answers on that. But my question to you is about the bigger picture here, especially with the backdrop of this erosion of bipartisan support during confirmation hearings and accusations of the court sort of becoming politicized. What kind of impact do you think this situation, this leak, could have on people's trust of the nation's highest court?
I think it's very damaging for trust in the court. I think that it reveals the court to be nakedly political. I think the court has always tried to insulate itself from politics and to say that it's above the fray, although justices may reflect the worldview of the president who put them there. They're deciding the cases in good faith on fact and law. But the fact that someone was willing to leak this does, I think, undermine that sort of trust that they're all there together working in good faith. Because to leak it, I think, one way or the other, is either trying to generate some outrage, or it is trying to lock people into a certain position. And so all of those things, I think, are damaging to the institution.
Barbara, we also want to ask you, this leaked draft opinion also references cases about LGBTQ issues, namely the landmark decision to legalize gay marriage. Justice Alito refers to that case and others, saying, quote, none of these rights has any claim to being deeply rooted in history. Is there a chance the decision here could have an impact on cases involving same-sex marriage down the road?
Very much so. I think that because that case, as well as other kinds of cases, interracial marriage, use of contraception, all of those cases are built on the same foundation as Roe versus Wade, and that is this implied right to privacy. The words are not in the Constitution, nor are words, other words that we rely on, like executive privilege or qualified immunity or presumption of innocence. None of those things are in the Constitution, but the court has interpreted those things to be there. And so now if the privacy interest is gone, then all of those cases that rely on it are in jeopardy.
Barbara McQuade, thank you so much for your analysis. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And now to Ohio, where J.D. Vance has been declared the winner in the Republican primary for Rob Portman's open Senate seat. Vance's win is also a victory for Donald Trump and his agenda, which could have far-reaching implications for the midterms this November. NBC News correspondent Jesse Kirsch joins us now from Cleveland, Ohio. Hey, Jesse, good morning.
Good morning, Savannah. The state's GOP Senate primary, a pivotal test of former President Donald Trump's influence over the Republican Party. J.D. Vance, the well-known author of Hillbilly Elegy, got a late bump after an endorsement from Trump, and last night he cruised to victory.
This morning, former President Donald Trump's grip on the Republican Party looks even tighter heading into the pivotal midterm elections this fall. Overnight, J.D. Vance projected the winner of Ohio's raucous Republican Senate primary, beating out 6 other candidates. His profile surging in the final weeks of the race after a late endorsement from the 45th president. Some voters skeptical of the Hillbilly Elegy author who previously took swipes at Trump and his supporters, but others unfazed.
I believe that he will do good for this country.
The high-profile race featured several candidates, all tying themselves to Trump's policy, messaging, or both.
They wanted to write a story that this campaign would be the death of Donald Trump's America First agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, it ain't the death of the America First agenda.
On Sunday, Trump confusing Vance with rival Josh Mandel.
We've endorsed JP, right? J.D. Mandel, and he's doing great.
Then tempering expectations Tuesday after the polls opened.
They're all very good. Everybody's good, but I think J.D.'s best suited to win the election.
Vance will face off against Democratic Congressman Tim Ryan.
We have to put workers front and center in the economy in the United States of America, not the hedge funds, not the banks.
Vance's victory in Ohio seen by some as a roadmap for Republicans hoping to regain control of Congress, only needing a net pickup of 5 House seats and just 1 in the deadlocked Senate. Also at stake, President Biden's agenda, with midterm elections usually a referendum on the incumbent president. Recent polls showing more than half the country disapproves of Biden's job performance, driven by concerns about the flailing economy. Midterm seen as an uphill battle for Democrats, one that could shift the balance of power in Washington for the next 2 years.
The question now here in Ohio, can Democrats attract moderate Republicans and independents who might be put off by Vance's hard right positions? I spoke with one moderate Republican last night who told me he likely plans to vote for the Democrat in this race. So just because Trump's playbook appears to be successful so far in the primaries, that does not yet guarantee that it will work this fall as well. Savannah?
Jesse Kirsch, thank you so much.
Hoping to get high inflation under control, the Federal Reserve is expected to announce another interest rate hike today. Back in March, the Fed raised interest rates by 0.25%, but this new hike might be higher. NBC News business and technology correspondent Joe Lynn Kent joins us with a preview. Joe, good morning.
Hey, Joe, good morning. Today, the Fed is set to unleash its biggest rate hike since 2000 as it tries to get inflation under control. Very simply here, by raising interest rates again, it's going to become more expensive to take out new loans. Credit card interest rates go up if you carry a balance. And the idea is to basically cool off this demand for buying things in the pandemic. And the high prices you see will ideally come back down to earth. But this is a delicate balancing act as the Fed tries to avoid stoking a recession.
This morning, the cost of borrowing money is set to rise. It comes as the Federal Reserve is expected to hike interest rates once again, this time by up to 0.5 percentage point, the largest increase in more than 2 decades. The move is the Fed's attempt to rein in soaring inflation, which is weighing heavily on budgets everywhere, from the pump to the grocery store.
My grocery bills are getting larger and larger, not only because I have a preteen, but because the prices are going up.
The goal is if borrowing money becomes more expensive, demand will drop and prices will go back down. But economists are split on whether or not the move will ultimately bring relief to the cost of living. Some fearing raising rates too quickly could trigger a recession. In the meantime, the price of new mortgages will immediately jump, raising home prices dramatically for some.
I mean, the rates are going to go up, and, the type of houses that we're looking at, the prices aren't really going to go down.
Andrew Cardenet's worried about paying even more for his dream home in Nashville, motivating him and his family to secure their big purchase as soon as possible.
How far did you have to stretch to make this new house happen?
We had to put about 8% over asking price on an already very expensive house.
Another rate hike would also bump up the price of car and adjustable rate loans again and make paying off credit card debt even costlier. With a 0.5-point increase, a $5,000 balance would carry an additional $193 in total interest. And the rate hikes are expected to continue through the rest of this year as the Fed tries to strike a delicate balance to get inflation under control.
Today's expected hike could be good news for savers, though these high interest rate, those high yield savings accounts tend to slowly follow the federal funds rate. But of course, this comes as Americans, we're all changing our spending habits right now to manage those budgets. Our new NBC News Morning Consult online poll found that 6 in 10 shoppers say they've decided not to purchase something because it was too expensive, or they've decided to wait until the price went down. Joe.
All right, Joe, thank you so much. Time to get a check on your morning news now. Weather.
Which means Michelle Grossman is back. Hey, Michelle.
Good morning to you both. And we're watching a few things today. One being, you need the umbrellas in the East Coast because we're watching a cold front that's going to move off the coast. Before it does, though, we're seeing showers all the way from New England through the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic down to the Southeast. We have another storm system that's going to bring severe weather to the central and southern plains, just like it did on Monday. So we're expecting some pretty strong storms, some strong tornadoes, some really big hail, also some gusty winds up to 70 miles per hour. Some mountain snow on the backside of that. A May chill. We've been talking about this for a while. We're looking at northern plains about 15 degrees below what is typical for this time of year. So let me show you those temperatures. So we have this cold front here. Out ahead of it, we have that warm air in place, indicated by this yellow here. 87 degrees in Richmond. That's 10 degrees above what is typical for this time of year. But you go back behind this cold front, we are still really chilly. And we're going to get another day of a chill, too, before we start to warm things up. So Chicago, once again, in the low 50s. We have low 50s also for North Platte, 60s in Des Moines, also Kansas City. So Chicago, you're 13 degrees below what is typical for this time of year. Then as we head towards tomorrow, Chicago still in the upper 50s, getting a little bit better. We're going to start to tack on some degrees, 8 degrees below normal. Nashville, 84, 78 degrees in Raleigh. So still really warm along the East Coast. And then we start to improve. Chicago, I kind of look at that because we're looking at temperatures in the upper 50s, like I just said, and we're going to be into the upper 60s by Sunday. So that's good news. Cleveland, 66, Cincinnati, 75 by Mother's Day. And we're looking at D.C. temperatures mainly in the 60s. So as we look towards Friday, we are looking at warm sunshine finally in the middle of the country, actually really warm in parts of southern Texas. The Southwest, we continue to watch that fire threat. We're going to do that today. Also tomorrow, notice rain and wind in the Pacific Northwest. That's our next weather maker that's going to move across the country. But we're also looking at showers stretching all the way from the Great Lakes to the Mid-Atlantic down to the Southeast. And where you see that yellow, we can see more moderate rainfall. Kentucky Derby, so fun to watch. And if you're going, we are looking at temperatures in the 60s. This is the afternoon hours if you're out celebrating. We're also looking at the chance for scattered showers and storms. And I do want to say before that, Thursday and Friday, we are looking at showers and storms. So the track could be pretty muddy, but it will be much drier on Saturday, just still that leftover rain. Then as we look at the rest of the country on Saturday, still looking at fire danger in the Southwest, more snow and rain in the Pacific Northwest. And then on the backside, we are looking at cooler weather. And I'll end here because Mother's Day comes on Sunday. Drying out in the Northeast, spring heat, temperatures in the hundreds in southern Texas. Back to you guys.
It's a hot Mother's Day, all right.
Yeah. And a good reminder for everyone. Mother's
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Get the presents.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Michelle.
Sure.
Now we've got our eyes on all the major stories making headlines on this Wednesday morning.
That's right. Coming up, we're going to have continuing coverage and expert analysis of the future of Roe versus Wade across the country, plus the very latest out of Ukraine. Evacuations continue out of that besieged Mariupol steel plant as the European Union proposes searing new sanctions against Moscow. That and more after the break.
Welcome back this morning. The European Union has announced its latest package of Russian sanctions, which includes a proposal to ban Russian oil. Those measures come after a group of more than 100 evacuated civilians finally reached safety yesterday after being trapped inside a Mariupol steel plant for months. NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin joins us now from Kyiv with the latest. Hey, Aaron.
Hey, Savannah, we're just getting some news from that besieged steel plant in Mariupol. The mayor of the devastated city says that they have lost contact with the Ukrainian fighters still trapped inside the plant. Those fighters trapped along with a number of civilians. Meanwhile, in the war-torn northeastern city of Kharkiv, Ukrainian soldiers are surveying the damage Russian troops left behind. On the outskirts of the northeastern city of Kharkiv, Ukrainian troops survey the death and destruction the Russians left behind after reclaiming control of at least 11 villages, according to Ukrainian authorities. Meanwhile, after 3 days traveling on what's been described as the road from hell, dozens of civilians finally arrived on safe Ukrainian territory from the devastated city of Mariupol. More than 100 women and children, many thought they might never live to see this moment. For weeks, they were trapped inside the nuclear bunker of an old steel plant, the last Ukrainian stronghold of the besieged city, surrounded by Russian forces with no way out. You can't imagine how scary it is when you sit in the shelter in a wet and damp basement, which is bouncing, shaking, she says. Until the UN and Red Cross managed what seemed impossible, negotiating a break in the fighting. Just enough time for some to escape, but many were left behind. 14-year-old Vova made it out with his mom and brother, but his father, a Ukrainian fighter, is still in the plant. He spoke to NBC's Matt Bradley.
What did your father tell you when you left? What did he say to you?
He said we'd meet each other soon. In Kyiv Tuesday, the wives and mothers of the trapped Ukrainian fighters marched to President Zelensky's office for help. Amidst reports Russian troops were storming the plant. The ICRC says it's working to secure more evacuations.
You need to pass checkpoints. You need to talk to the parties to the conflict. Things on the ground change by the minute. We have to remember this is an active conflict zone.
What's your message to someone who's been left behind?
We have not forgotten the people in Mariupol, in Azovstal, and we're working round the clock tirelessly to get people out wherever they are trapped.
With the plant once again being relentlessly bombarded, hope of another rescue mission fades with each explosion. Ukrainian officials say 4 separate evacuations are planned for the Mariupol area today, but none from that besieged steel plant. Again, the Mariupol mayor reporting intense fighting around the plant, saying they've lost all contact with Ukrainians trapped inside. Savannah.
Aaron, thank you so much.
Hagar Shamali is the host of Oh My World on YouTube. She's also the former spokesperson for the U.S. mission to the UN and joins us now to talk more about the situation in Ukraine. So, Hagar, thanks for joining us. Let's start off with this latest package of sanctions from the European Union. The proposals include disconnecting Russia's largest bank from the SWIFT payment system. And here's a big one, banning Russian oil. Could these steps have any impact on Putin? And do you think that all member states are going to support him?
I do. One of the things that the EU was waiting for were for the French elections to pass before they took this step. And the reason for that is that they didn't want any measures that could increase gas and oil prices locally, domestically, to further bolster the far-right candidate in France. So France, we can talk about it another time, but they waited for those elections that took place 10 days ago in order to pursue this package. And The reason they did is because it's going to be very strong, right? Europe imports 40% of its oil and gas from Russia. This is going to hit them very hard. The EU is going to have to scramble to find other sources and to set up infrastructure to receive those other sources. So you've heard of other sources like the United States, like Qatar trying to step in, and they will. But this goes for the jugular in the Russian economy. It makes up 30% of Russia's economy, and it's a language that President Putin understands. Sanctions alone are not going to change his behavior, but when you're talking about this level of sanctions, coupled with the very intense military aid that the United States and others are providing to Ukraine, if you couple all of that with an emphasis on peace negotiations, then you could really reach an end to this.
Let's talk about that standoff at the steel plant in Mariupol. The world is watching it. Yesterday, we saw the first group of evacuees reach safety, but Ukrainian officials say we still got about 200 civilians trapped there. How much of an achievement was it for the UN to get those people out? Does this give you some confidence they could get the rest out?
It gives me a little confidence, but I don't want to overstress it because the Russian government, anytime in any conflict, by the way, with Syria, it was no different. When they say that they've agreed to a ceasefire, that they're going to allow safe corridors, they're lying through their teeth. So to answer your first question, yes, it is impressive that they were able to get some civilians at all. But the Russian government is going to continue dangling this in front of us to try and stop, to try and make the West stop arms shipments. That's why they're only allowing a trickle out at a time. So I do have a small measure of hope that they're going to be able to get others, but it's going to be very difficult. That's why the focus has to be on broader peace negotiations as soon as possible.
Agar, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We always appreciate it. Coming up on Morning News Now.
The best way to say it, if I get elected President of the United States and the Supreme Court overrules Roe v. Wade, I'm going to send legislation to the United States Congress to pass it and codify it.
President Biden through the years on Roe versus Wade. Back in 2019, when he was candidate Biden, he promised protection for those seeking an abortion. So where exactly does he stand now? That's next. We continue our coverage of that leaked Supreme Court opinion on the future of Roe versus Wade. President Biden has responded to the draft, calling it quite a radical decision. He also called on Congress to codify abortion rights. Now, this is not the first time the president suggested abortion rights be written into law. During his 2020 presidential campaign, then candidate Biden tweeted in part, quote, "As president, I'll codify Roe versus Wade and protect a woman's constitutional right to choose." Here's a look at some of the other comments President Biden has made over the years about Roe v. Wade.
Why do you think Roe v. Wade was a good decision?
Because I think it's as close to a consensus that can exist in a society as heterogeneous as ours. Life begins at conception. That's the church's judgment. I accept it in my personal life. But I refuse to impose it on equally devout Christians and Muslims and Jews. And I just refuse to impose that on others, unlike my friend here, the congressman. I do not believe that that we have a right to tell other people that women, they can't control their body. It's the best way to say it. If I get elected President of the United States and the Supreme Court overrules Roe v. Wade, I'm going to send legislation to the United States Congress to pass it and codify it.
Take a look at what's happening in states like Texas. They just passed a law empowering complete strangers to become bounty hunters, going after women who exercise their right to choose. A law that the United States Supreme Court refused to stop. Now other states say they're looking to replicate the Texas law. If you don't think women's rights are under assault, you're not looking.
It concerns me a great deal that we're going to, after 50 years, decide a woman does not have a right to choose within the limits of the Supreme Court decision in Casey. I think the decision in Roe is correct because there's a right to privacy. There can be limitations on it, but it cannot be denied.
That Supreme Court leak is pushing abortion rights back into the spotlight, and Americans are divided on whether the procedure should be legal. Here are the numbers, according to a most recent NBC News poll. 31% of people believe abortion should always be legal, compared to 23% of people who say it should be legal most of the time. On the other hand, though, 34% of people think abortion should be illegal with exceptions, and 8% want a total ban. Let's bring in NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray for more on these numbers. Mark, good morning. Good to have you with us. So let's take a look at some of these numbers a little bit closer. In 2021, 54% of people felt abortion should be legal most or all of the time. In 2018, 71% of people felt Roe versus Wade should not be overturned. So how did we end up here? Because the numbers I just read kind of painted a little bit of a different picture.
Yeah, and so, Savannah, it is important to note that our polling on these two different questions have been pretty stable over the past decades. We've been asking them going back, particularly the question on Roe versus Wade, since 1989. And so when we show that a majority think that abortion should be legal, it's important to note the numbers in the middle, where there's a lot of nuance in that debate, where you actually have a majority of people who say that abortion should be legal most of the time, but not all of the time, along when you combine it with people who think it should be illegal with exceptions. So there's a lot of middle ground there. The other question, when you end up having 71% who do not want to overturn Roe v. Wade, that's a question on whether you want to actually change the status quo or not. And so when looking at the polling numbers and looking at the midterm effect, that might be one of the biggest challenges for Republicans who really want this change, is they're disrupting the status quo. And the status quo has been pretty comfortable for a lot of Americans.
Let's also take a look at geographical location, because it seems to kind of play a factor here, at least in some of the trends that we're seeing. 65% of people living in urban areas support legal abortion, compared to 33% of people living in rural areas. And we also know Republicans tend to have a large voting population in rural areas. Do these numbers tell you anything about how abortion could influence the upcoming midterms?
So, when we ended up, it really is going to show you the places where in the states where you're going to end up having these kind of abortion bans. And one other piece of numbers, the South, Savannah, ends up having a overperformance in the share of people who want to make abortion illegal. And when you end up looking at whether it's the South or rural America, those are the GOP strongholds right now. And that's a really good indication of our politics, where urban America leans Democrat, suburban America is kind of right in the middle, the swing voters, and you end up having rural America, which is really the base of today's Republican Party.
Finally, let's focus on evangelicals. 26% of evangelicals approve of legal abortion. How has this group influenced the public debate over abortion?
Yeah, when we talk about the base of the Republican Party, evangelical Christians really do end up driving the discussion and driving a lot of the Republican base. And so their overwhelming opposition to abortion really comes as no surprise, and really kind of shows you the moving part of today's Republican Party and why they wanted this kind of decision, along with a lot of the Supreme Court justices that they've been able to put on the courts over the years.
Murray, a lot of interesting stuff in these numbers helping explain the divide right now. Thank you so much.
So if Roe versus Wade is overturned, 13 states will be waiting with so-called trigger laws. That means the states in dark orange on this map have laws which would effectively prohibit abortion treatments immediately. NBC News correspondent Kathy Park joins us now from Knoxville, Tennessee. That's one of the states that has a trigger law on the books. Kathy, good to see you. So if Roe v. Wade is overturned and that trigger law kicks in there in Tennessee, what are the options for women who are seeking an abortion?
Joe, good morning to you. So just a little bit of background here in the state of Tennessee. The trigger law actually passed in 2019. So what that essentially means is that if Roe v. Wade is overturned, the abortion ban would go into effect 30 days after. So it would make it illegal for medical providers, doctors to move forward with this procedure. The only exception would be if the pregnancy would endanger the life of a woman. And as I mentioned, since this trigger law was passed in 2019, Planned Parenthood started to set set things in motion. So they hired so-called patient advisors, hired more of them, and also trained more of them, because this would allow essentially to educate women about what their resources would be outside of the state of Tennessee. So if this were to be overturned, women would have to drive hours away to places like West Virginia, Illinois, and North Carolina to get an abortion, Joe.
So, Kathy, we've been seeing protests all around the country since this draft was leaked. What are you seeing there in Tennessee, which is a very red state?
Yeah, you got that right. This is a very conservative state, but you have reactions from both sides. In fact, here in Knoxville, just yesterday, as people were leaving work, there was a large crowd that gathered in front of the federal courthouse, which is just a few blocks away. Roughly 100 people gathered out there defending Roe v. Wade. A lot of them expressed their frustrations, their anger about the possible reversal of women's rights. We also had a chance to speak with some Tennesseans this morning. Take a listen.
We're talking about many of the rights that have been given to minorities, to women. A lot of the progress that has been made in our society has been based on those rights, and they're starting to take them away. And I think, they always talk about a slippery slope for many things, and it's usually gun right advocates talking about that. We're on that slippery slope right now to taking away rights, fundamental rights that people need.
Now, the CEO of Planned Parenthood here in the state of Tennessee expressed her frustration, issued a statement which read, in part, eliminating the right to an abortion will have serious life and death consequences for our patients, and we will fight like hell to defend their lives. Meanwhile, Joe, as you can imagine, a lot of reaction from elected officials, including Governor Bill Lee, the Republican governor here in the state of Tennessee. He also added the draft opinion offers a glimmer of redemption as America reconciles our troubled past. So, as you mentioned, this is a conservative state, but you have both sides weighing in on this very hot-button issue, Joe.
Kathy Park in Knoxville. Kathy, thank you.
Now, with another interest rate hike looming later today and the high cost of living due to inflation, Americans are looking for ways to earn a little extra cash. With more than half of Americans living paycheck to paycheck, starting a side hustle might bring an extra boost to your wallet. NBC News senior consumer investigative correspondent Vicki Nguyen joins us now to share some tips on how you can earn some extra green. Hey, Vicki, good morning. Love this. So when it comes to a great side hustle, what should people be looking for in order to get something like that off the ground?
Easy, Savannah. 3 things. You want to know, what is your earning potential? Really, how much money are you going to make from this side hustle? How much time is it going to take? Do you have time in your schedule for it? And finally, could you leverage this into a full-time hustle?
Huh. All right. Well, look at that. That's pretty cool. If you're looking to earn extra money, though, without leaving your home, what options do people have? Maybe they're working from home and it is just going to be a side hustle. They've got kids. What can you do if you just want to stay at home?
I want to answer this question because a lot of people want to know, well, should I take those online surveys or watch those videos that say earn money to watch this video or play this video game? Well, that's all well and good. And if you can read quickly and answer questions quickly, you may be able to make some money. But a lot of people are only making about $5 an hour doing those online surveys. You really want to be careful about protecting your identity and be careful about scams. So if you are thinking about doing one of those services, always enter the name of the online survey company or the video game company and the word review or the word scam, and do your research before you jump in. I would like to say Upwork.com and Fiverr.com offer opportunities for you to be a virtual assistant or maybe work in virtual data entry. Those could actually be leveraged into full-time careers. They pay better hourly. And by the way, I did this thing with Bite Ninja, where I took fast food orders from my home in New York for a restaurant in Tennessee. It was fun, and those jobs pay $10 to $20 an hour. You can work just during lunch or just during the dinner rush. Check that out as well.
I think you had a fan, too, who just happened to be in the drive-thru line, Vicki. I saw that. That was fun. Okay, now, you mentioned scams, and this one might sound like a scam, but tell us some legitimate ways that there's essentially free money available to you, some legit ways to get cash you might already be entitled to. And also, I know that there's something that people are doing where they're using their swimming pools for profit. What is that about?
Yes. So first, let's talk about USA.gov, which is a great site that consolidates a lot of federal and state websites that will allow you to go on, enter your name, and see if there may be some unclaimed money in your name. It sounds wild, but it happens all the time. People forget to collect that last pension check, or your insurance payment gets lost in the mail, and then the state is holding on to that money for you. Or in some cases, let's say you put down a deposit for your utilities and then you move, and they don't know where to forward your deposit to. So there are literally billions of dollars of unclaimed money sitting out there for folks. And I would encourage you to do this with your family members too. Help them out to see if there might be some money for them. When it comes to the pool, we've all heard of Airbnb and Vrbo, renting out rooms or homes. Well, Swimmy and Swimply are trying to help you do that with your backyard pool or cabana. And I'm telling you, I've seen things as low as $12 per person per hour for a pool rental, up to the hundreds, depending on if you have a really sweet backyard. Just remember, you should check first with your homeowner's insurance, because there is definitely some liability that comes along with letting people in the pool.
Huh. Wow, $12 a head to just come on into your backyard. Something. All right, Vicki, great tips there. That was fun. Thank you so much.
Turning now to your money, we've got some news for Starbucks baristas. The coffee giant planning to spend more on expanding wages and benefits.
Yeah, Silvana Henao joins us with that and more in our CNBC Money Minute. Hey, Silvana.
Hey guys, good morning. Yeah, so Starbucks will spend more on wages and benefits for baristas and to improve stores. This includes pay increases of at least 5% for those who've worked at the company for 2 years. Newer baristas will get pay bumps of at least 3%, and Starbucks will give one-time bonuses for store managers and other leaders. However, this will only cover stores that haven't unionized. Those cafes will have to negotiate their own terms. Airbnb is betting on pent-up demand to drive a summer of strong travel as COVID restrictions ease worldwide. The company reporting better than expected quarterly results and projecting robust sales this quarter. The rise of hybrid work has encouraged people to book longer and more frequent stays, giving a boost to rental providers.
Here's a heartwarming story about one high school's prom night royalty. Zane Wales and Anna Anderson, two teenagers with Down syndrome, were named prom king and queen by their fellow students last month. One of the teachers at Jefferson Forest High School said the honor given to Wales and Anderson reflected how much the pair means to their classmates. The plan to name the duo as prom king and queen began actually in February, and several local companies also pitched in, getting them a limousine, even those snazzy outfits for the big dance. Love to see that. What a great plan by their classmates.
Exactly. Oh, so sweet.
All right, this morning, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has announced its much-anticipated list of inductees, and includes one star who didn't initially want her name on the list.
That's right. Dolly Parton will be inducted as part of the 2022 class. Now, back in March, you might remember, she said she was removing herself from consideration after the ballots went out. She later reversed course as the voting period was ending. Other names on this year's list include Lionel Richie, Pat Benatar, Duran Duran, and Eminem.
And more. I mean, Carly Simon, the Eurythmics. It's an incredible class this year of people. So
it's very cool. Right when it just came out, while we were on the show, I said,
Right.
didn't she not want it? Because,
Right.
of course, Joe is our Dolly Parton correspondent.
Yeah.
And I remember you telling us about that.
Yeah, and then last week she kind of came out. She was talking to NPR, and she said, she's learned since then that there are other non-rock people, like, Johnny Cash, who are in it. So she kind of realized, oh, I guess this is okay. I can be part of it.
Hello.
And she'll be welcomed with open arms.
Yeah,
So,
Dolly Parton can be on any list.
no
Hello.
kidding. That'll be quite the show. It's in November. They'll be officially inducted. So
Absolutely. Very
can't
cool.
wait for that. All right, that does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.